What's going on, everybody? Today is May 18th, 2019. My name is Derek, and I just wanted to do a video to go along with my blog post from today, talking about this rather bizarre news story where police in Scotland have shut down the ice cream and milkshake making at a local McDonald's in fear that protesters would be buying them with the intent of dumping them on politician Nigel Farage, who will be in the area. And the reason this is because over the past several weeks, Tommy Robinson, a quote-unquote far-right political activist, has had milkshakes dumped on his head. And the police shutting this McDonald's down in order to prevent that is in response. So in this video, I want to make a connection between this whole story, which again began on May 2nd, when someone threw a milkshake on Tommy Robinson, a screen cap taken here. And we're going to look at the numerical connections to a fairly significant event this week in the field of science. And I just want you to think about this from a logical perspective first, before we get too deep into the numbers. This year, we will have the 2019 redefinition of SI base units, which means there will be a slight redefinition to several of these international base units, such as the kilogram, the ampere, and most significantly to this story, the Kelvin, which is the temperature scale. It's basically the same as Celsius, but it begins at absolute zero, which is the coldest possible temperature, or no heat. And that's 273 degrees negative in Celsius. So 273 degrees Kelvin equals 0 degrees Celsius, the melting point of water. And you might think this is no real big deal, and it's really not. You know, they're not necessarily changing the measurements, but just the definitions. But consider that this has not been done since 1960. A fact you can gather from the early part of this Wikipedia article. So it hasn't been done since 1960. Now it's happening again this week in 2019. And just think about the Kelvin and the scale being absolute zero for 0 degrees Kelvin. And in this story, in the news, this is all about ice cream. And it's funny that an ice, beverage, so to speak, is being used, and we'll discuss more on this as we go. Also, think about who the Kelvin scale is named after. This man is named William Thomson, 1st Baron Kelvin. So they get the Kelvin scale from this man and his contributions in the field of science. So it's interesting. This guy's name is Thomson, right? And this story involves Tommy Robinson. So you have the Tom and the son right there in his name. So all these connections I will elaborate further on through the numbers. The first cipher we're going to look at is the most basic, the alphabetic order, called English ordinal, where the alphabet is numbered 1 through 26, each letter relative to its position in the alphabet. Using this standard cipher, McDonald's has a numeric value of 85. In this news story, McDonald's is being prevented from selling milkshakes due to a Nigel Farage rally. And in the same method, the alphabetic order, Nigel Farage sums to 85, just like McDonald's. Although McDonald's was founded by the Kroc family in 1940, they did not become a corporation until 1955. In the reverse reduction method, this is also called Pythagorean gematria, each number reduced to a single digit. In the reverse alphabetic order, the word milkshake equals 55. McDonald's became a corporation in the year 55, and Nigel Farage is currently 55 years old. Notice he's also 45 days after his birthday today. That's the ordinal value of milk. And again, the whole reason that McDonald's is being banned from selling these drinks is because of Tommy Robinson getting milkshakes dumped on him. Now, Tommy Robinson was born on November 27th, which means that in this video, in which he had the milkshake dumped on him by an activist, or someone he was talking to anyway in this video, notice how he was 5 months and 5 days after his birthday when that milkshake was dumped on him, again lining up with the gematria of milkshake. On this date, Tommy Robinson was 1,900 weeks and 6 days old. This took place in Warrington, England, which sums to 196 in ordinal. And remember, the last redefinition of SI base units was in 1960. So we have a couple of alignments here with 196. But let's look at today's date, the date where this is really hitting the mainstream media and, of course, being shown in headline news. Tommy Robinson, as of today's date, is exactly 1,903 weeks old. Also, he's 193 days before his birthday. So this number's showing up twice in his age. Well, look at the value of McDonald's milkshake. McDonald's milkshakes summing to 193 in the alphabetic order. And for good measure, Tommy Robinson equals 192 in the same method, which isn't 193. Of course, occasionally I do refer to the rule of Colel, which talks about how 1 can be subtracted or added to a gematria value. I don't talk about it often, but seems interesting here with all these 193 alignments that his name equals 192. But here's where it gets really interesting. And we're going to tie this into the Kelvin scale. We're also going to talk about an NFL tight end who recently broke a single-season receiving record. That would be George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers. And how this may all be tying into the numerology of a potential event in San Francisco later this year on Tisha B'Av, an event which many people have been predicting and talking about for a while now. So the other significant cipher I talk about in this study is Jewish gematria. This is also called Latin gematria. I've also recently seen this referred to as Agrippin. And this cipher, very significant. Perhaps the most significant outside the ordinal and reduction methods. Cipher that produces much larger numbers. Notice how this milkshake incident with Tommy Robinson earlier this month occurred in front of a Crawshaw's. See the store name right there? Rarely are these store names coincidental in the mainstream media. Well, notice how Crawshaw's has this gematria of 2,073. Isn't it interesting that this is the same as Milkshake's, which sums to 273? And this number, 273, is so significant because remember, the Kelvin scale defines the melting point of water at 273 degrees Kelvin. Furthermore, notice how milkshake equals 89 and 35 in the alphabetic order and reduction. The word Kelvin also sums to 89 and 35. Today's news story coming out on a date with a life lesson number of 35, found in the gematria of both milkshake and Kelvin. And if at this point you're thinking how ridiculous this video is, I agree with you. It is ridiculous, but there's something very strange going on in the mainstream media where these connections are not difficult to come about. And special shout out again to Bobby, a.k.a. Falcor, who brought some of this research to my knowledge recently, and really helps put this together. So we talked about how Kelvin has Gematria overlapping with Milkshake. Well, look at the Jewish Gematria of Milkshake. Here we see it sums to 183. This brings us back to the man that the Kelvin scale is named after. His name is William Thomson. In the alphabetic order, William Thomson has this value of 183. Also notice the 66 in reduction. William Thomson was also known as Baron Kelvin, which sums to 66. The Kelvin scale begins at absolute 0, which sums to 66. And in this possibly bogus news story, which I contend that it is, notice how Tommy Robinson equals 66. And this is all about a McDonald's milkshake, which equals 66. And as far as all these sixes, think about how temperature equals 666 in Jewish Gematria. And again, I want to point out the irony of a milkshake, which is an ice cream beverage, being used in this riddle that has to do with cold temperatures and absolute 0. You can just keep going. Tommy Robinson equals 159. This is the same as ice cream, 159. The Kelvin scale beginning at absolute 0, which sums to 159 as well. So again, this news story coming out on the 18th of May from the UK. In the UK, this date is written as 18/5. And 185 is another significant number I want to talk about. Notice how absolute 0 has this value of 1103. Well, 1103 is the 185th prime number. On the date that the Kelvin scale will be redefined this year, which is May 20th, the man the Kelvin scale was named after will be 71,185 days old. Or would have been, of course. He passed away in 1907. But here we see that 185 number, just like today's date, just like how absolute 0 equals the 185th prime number. And to further drive this home, it was, let's see, the announcement that these measurements would be changed occurred back on November 16th. So you'll see here that the new definition was adopted on the 16th of November at this other convention. And this date is verifiable elsewhere. This is the only place I see it here on Wikipedia. But if you measure from 11/16 of last year to the date of the change, it's 185 days. So this number is definitely significant to this whole ritual. And now let's look at some conversions here. If you punch in 1103 degrees Celsius, notice how this, well, it's pretty close. 2019 degrees Fahrenheit. Think about how this is the year 2019, the year of the redefinition of absolute 0. Well, 1103 degrees Celsius, the 185th prime number, converts to exactly 2019 degrees Fahrenheit. If you instead convert this Celsius number to Kelvin, you get another number that we're going to talk about in depth right here, 1377. Why is this number significant? Well, first I want to show you a couple of alignments with the Gematria and dates of William Thomson. In English Extended Gematria, the cipher that's close to Latin but uses the current 26-letter English alphabet, the name William Thomson sums to 1137. So here we see the same digits, 137. If you measure from his death, December 17th, 1907, to the date of the change, you get 1,337 months, another number with the 137 alignment. But as far as the actual 1377 that's seen in the conversion, this brings us to something else that is pretty interesting that happened just this past year. In 2018, tight end George Kittle broke the single-season tight end receiving record with exactly 1,377 yards. And look at how tight end in Jewish Gematria sums to 273. This number that's associated with Kelvin. When this change occurs on May 20th, the definition change, George Kittle, who was born on October 9th of 1993, will be in his 1,337th week since he was born. And you may call this a stretch, playing with numbers, whatever. Regardless, the alignments, the digits, they're all there. And this ties into the potential event we're talking about for San Francisco later this year. This is where it gets a little creepy, especially when we start looking at the Bible. Keep in mind that the 49ers, the team that Kittle plays for, play their games in San Francisco, California. In reverse reduction, this sums to 141. The 141st prime number is 811. And I just want to remind you guys, also in reverse gematria, New York, New York, which was the site of 9/11, that sums to 156, and the 156th prime number is 9/11. And now we're talking about a potential event on 8/11 in San Francisco, California. Well, 8/11, the 141st prime, just like San Francisco, California. Now, there's another significant alignment with 811 and 141, and this brings us to the book of Revelation. Now, remember, I'm not predicting a major catastrophe in San Francisco that day, even though the numbers are really interesting. It could be something completely different, We just might get a news story about the Pope stopping at a McDonald's or something ridiculous, but you never know. But what I want to point out is how the 141st verse of Revelation is Revelation 8:11. So there's a prime number relationship right here in the King James Bible in the book of Revelation. And when we take the gematria of King James Revelation 8:11, in the alphabetic order, we get 1377. And isn't that interesting? 1,377, that's the number of yards that tight end George Kittle had, breaking the tight end receiving record this past year. And Revelation 8:11, the 141st verse, summing to 1377. This is pretty weird stuff. And there's more connections here. Check this out. If you include the end date, May 20th, which is the date that the Kelvin and other significant measurements will be redefined, this is a span of 2 months and 23 days before 8/11, 2019. August 11th is the 223rd day of the year. And check out George Kittle. He was born October 9th, 1993, which means on the date of today's news story, he's 223 days. I'm sorry, on the date of the measurement change on the 20th, he'll be 223 days after his birthday. So when we're looking at the Gematria of Revelation 8:11, also notice the reduction value of 567. Well, how about this for a finale? If you measure from the birthday of George Kittle, October 9th, 1993, to the birthday of Tommy Robinson, who's being used in this ridiculous Milkshake story, they were born exactly 567 weeks apart. I don't know what else to say about this. I don't know what this is pointing at. I don't know if this verifies any of the predictions that many people are making. But it really makes you wonder. It just seems like, why would this be coded so deeply to begin with? But we're seeing more than enough alignments to know that something is there. So, thanks to the few of you who jumped in, I noticed that far fewer of you are getting my notifications when I go live lately, and that's fine. I mean, that happens. It's also in the middle of the day on a Saturday, so wouldn't expect everybody to be jumping in. And shout out to those of you checking out EDC this weekend. I think I'll probably check out a couple of sets myself in a little bit here. But I just wanted to share the numerology of this story with you and what I think it really is a tribute to. It's this very significant event in the scientific community this week, all tied into the Revelation riddle that we're seeing. All right, guys, that'll do it for this one. Peace, love, and God bless, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Adios.